Okay. So I can't guarantee that they won't come looking for me, but I'll do my best.
Excellent.
Great. I will just, we have about 6 attendees here. It should grow a little bit. We're also streaming on YouTube. I guess without further ado, I'll introduce Jarvis. Jarvis Googoo is our moderator for this conversation. He's the Associate Director for Health at the Atlantic Policy Congress. He's very active in the Mi'kmaq community and in sport, and he has kindly agreed to moderate this conversation with Waneek Horn-Miller for us. So Jarvis, I'll let you introduce Waneek, and you guys can be up and away with this.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. Hello, everyone. As Julie said, my name's Jarvis Googoo. Very honored to be a moderator for the North American Indigenous Games NAIG at home. And then I would love to introduce you a friend of mine who I believe I first met her March 2017, actually, in Vancouver. Olympian Waneek Horn-Miller. So welcome.
Oh, no.
Oh, I think it froze. Hi, Waneek. Did you hear that one?
No, I didn't hear it. You froze. That's okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, I just introduced you. And so some of the themes we'll be exploring today on this NAIG at home will be coping in isolation, managing stress and pressure, talking about mental health, as well as elevating Indigenous athletes. So basically, we got a couple of questions we'd love to ask Waneek here, general themed questions. So when you're ready, I'm ready to start.
Great. Well, it's so good to see you. It's good to see everybody. I'm so happy that NAIG is doing something to mark this, because, you know, like I know that athletes were prepping. I mean, everywhere I was going in Canada, everybody was talking about NAIG, excited to head out there. I have friends that are going to the Olympics that got postponed too. So that has been really like, but you know what? Everybody seems to understand, which is great. You know, like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let's not do that. But, you know, the fact that you guys are doing this is really cool. So I'm really happy to be part of it, and talking about one of the things that actually just now, with the 30th anniversary of the Oka crisis, which is the 30th anniversary of the very first NAIG games in which I competed in, that was in Edmonton.
Wow.
It's a lot, like it's a special time. So let's go. Let's do this.
Excellent. Alrighty, so one of the themes we're going to be talking about is isolation. And of course, with the cancellation of the Arctic Games, NAIG, and basically sports in general, and as mentioned earlier, the Olympics, for the last few months, what do you say, or what do you think are the impacts that you are seeing on reduced activity and reduced sport activity that's available in communities?
Well, multiple things. I mean, you know, first and foremost, it's just the be able to get outside, like, or the physical activity, the movement, you know, people, you know, whether it was pickup, you know, house league sports back home, or if you were, you know, doing competitive sports like hockey, a lot of hockey players out there, a lot of people doing that, water polo players, all, you know, that just like this sudden stop. You know, people were gearing up for the summer leagues. People were gearing up for a lot of races, you know, runners like yourself getting ready for all the races that were going to be happening. That, like, we planned for those, we trained for those all year. The mental kind of, suddenly it's done. And then in place of that, which all that healthy kind of, you know, looking forward to physical activity was replaced with a lot of fear, unknown, not knowing what was happening. And I think to a lot of people, and me included, like, I had my last 2 big water polo tournaments canceled, you know, like right in the beginning of COVID. And I mean, that's not like, you know, whatever, I'm not a high performance like water polo player anymore, but it was really important to the young girls that I was playing with, you know, that's what they trained for all year. So I know that it kind of froze me. I don't know about how you felt, but like, I was just like it was like minute to minute, like, what is this thing? What is this called COVID? What do you mean we can't go anywhere? What do you mean, you know, And just the abrupt, like suddenly March break was extended longer and longer and longer until there was no school. So I think a lot of people were having to kind of go through and deal with and try to understand something that we've all never been through, right? When have we not been able to see each other? That's been hard, right?
Yeah.
So that mentally, I think, I know personally, and you know what I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I started up something called the Soaring Spirit Movement because I just needed to connect with people because it was so important. And I was actually feeling quite depressed.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
totally understandable as well too. Kind of on that, and this kind of my next question kind of relates. And I think you answered my next question just a bit here. Was how have you been staying positive during this time? So obviously you mentioned the running group there, which I'm proud to be a part of there. But is there anything else, especially as an athlete such as yourself? What else have you been doing in the midst of all this?
Well, one of the things that my mom recognized, like right when we were really young, she put us into sports. And my mom never had it in her head that like we were going to become these high performance athletes. Like, we were swimmers and runners, but she wanted us to, she really wanted us to develop a habit of stress relief. That was like, she told me later on, I knew sports did, like I saw at a very young age that sports had a really good impact on you mentally. When I was young, I probably wouldn't have been diagnosed with like some form of ADHD. I was wild, like high strung kid, never slept, just crazy, you wouldn't give me a granule of sugar because I would be like, through the roof. Everybody knows a kid like that, right?
Yeah.
And no, that was before anybody knew anything about that. And so my mom put me into sports, and a lot of them I was like swimming, running, all these things. And but as I got older, and I've talked a lot about this recently with the Oka crisis and the 30th anniversary. I've done a lot of interviews about it. People have asked me, and I said, you know what? The stress that I went through during the Oka crisis as a teenager, 14-year-old, funny enough, coming back from the first ever Indigenous games in Edmonton, having on such a high, like loving it, just first time I've ever competed with other Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming back to, within a couple of weeks, having the Oka crisis breakout and being involved and going through a very traumatic experience. Well, after that ended, I went back to sports, right? Like it was really important for me to go back to kind of a habit that gave me a lot of calm, and it gave me a lot of self-confidence. It was really, really good. So like I knew instinctively when COVID hit and it started to look like it was going to be this long-term thing. Like my husband's a doctor. I was here. My sister's a doctor. So I'm hearing about it from them and really like asking them, and they didn't even really know, like they were reading all the medical forms telling me, trying to understand what was going on around the world. And so I just was like, okay, I need to do something, and I need to do physical activity. It has to be exercise or I'm going to go crazy. So I started doing that. I started doing the Soaring Spirit movement. I started doing workouts in my house, workouts that you can do on a kitchen chair. And then I started to think about all those people that I know and have met that have inspired me, that just gave me that little gift of like a good feeling. And you were one of those people. Remember we met on the bus? I don't know where we're.
Vancouver.
Chatty. And I was like, and then I got to know you, and then I got to follow, and I was like, man, like I started thinking about all those people, especially in those times. Like that's what I do when I'm in those times of like where I'm feeling down, and when I'm weighed down, I'm like, those people pop in my head that give me that extra bit of good medicine, right? That have given me those gifts of good medicine, and I tap into that. And you are one of those people. There's a couple other people that I featured, and like it was real. Like it wasn't just me going, hey, I want to say hi to my friends. I was like, it was real. These people are really, really important to me at these times because they give me inspiration, and they get me out the door to kind of walk or run or whatever I need to do. So that's what I was doing. I have 3 kids. So I was trying to navigate homeschooling.
Oh, yes.
you can't see your friends, you can't go anywhere, we can't go anywhere, you know. They're all like kids, like really tough to explain to them. Not, you don't want to give them the full explanation of what COVID is, because that scares them, right? But you also have to explain as to why you're not allowing them to touch people or see people, or, you know. So I was trying to grapple with that at the same time, and just trying to kind of give them enough information where they could understand why we had to stay home, but not to stress them out. But yeah, it was kind of a day by day, and I think I took it day by day. I took it and I tried to accomplish something every day, whether it was baking, figuring out how to bake sourdough bread.
They can be popular with people, I found.
Oh yeah, well
Yeah.
that's it. Like, and suddenly, you know, one of the stressful things, if you're, all you parents out there probably experience going to the grocery store, which stressed me out. The first time I went grocery shopping, I had to have a mask on. It took me like 45 minutes to get into the grocery store. And then I was like seeing all these people and I was breathing really heavy. I'm like almost having a panic attack, you know, an anxiety attack in the store. And then I got home and I got a sty in my eye from stress, just from grocery shopping.
Oh, I know what it's like. It's not a nice feeling.
It's not a nice feeling. I got this in my eye, but then I realized like there was no flour. There was no toilet paper. Everybody was hoarding. There were a lot of things that you were suddenly going, oh boy, this is crazy. I've never been through this before. And then going, okay, so then I kind of, what I did do, in the first few weeks of COVID, I was always on all the news, checking everything, you know, the numbers, this kind of stuff. And then I went, I can't do this anymore. I'm getting very scared and very depressed. So I had to kind of create a little bubble around me and my kids. And I told my husband, I'm like, you will keep me informed as to what is going on and what I need to know, but I need to create this bubble of safety around us and then just try to live with them in that bubble. And that's what I kind of did. Created my own little mental wellness bubble.
No, absolutely. Self-care is, it was always important even before COVID, but it became even more so important, especially during COVID, during these times.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So you kind of answered a bit of a question, but this one I find very interesting is, in some cases, youth are realizing that they are less stressed when they are at home and maybe noticing that they feel added stress in team environments. For athletes who are nervous about returning to the sport environment, what advice would you give them?
You know what? I've experienced with a couple of young athletes, NAIG age athletes. My niece Avery being one of them, and she's going off to U of T to play water polo. All these things that were meant to happen. Like what really, we talked a lot about it because we were talking and even going like jogging together, and I was trying to get her to work out when we were allowed to kind of see more than our family, and she was just really stressed about it. She was just like, I don't know. I said, you know what? Okay, so maybe your season's canceled. Maybe your season's canceled until 2021. But you're probably still going to go to school. So this is a time to pivot. And I read this really good book years ago when I went and played professional water polo in Barcelona. When I was 21, I lived in Barcelona for 9 months and played pro water polo. I know there's actually a thing for women.
Did not know. That's amazing.
I actually wanted to be paid at least once to do my sport. It was like a notch. I'm like, okay, now I've done that. I've been a pro athlete. So I remember actually in about halfway through, I like shot a ball and I followed through on a girl's forehead and I dislocated my thumb like backwards. It was like wrong, right? And then I like kind of looked at it and I popped it back in, and then like all my tendons they weren't ripped, but they were like, it turned black and I couldn't move my hand and all this kind of stuff. So I was like, here you are getting played to play sports, and I suddenly was injured, and so I remember I had this book called Thinking Body, Dancing Mind, and it's a sports psychology book that someone recommended to me that combines kind of Eastern philosophies, Eastern like about Asian, Eastern. And the one thing I remember reading this book was when something happens, say an injury happens, we focus on that injury. We'll focus on it so much that our body will almost slow down its healing process. Because it's like watching water boil. It seems to go slower when you're watching it, right? But if you do something else while the water's boiling, you're just like, oh, it's boiled, right? It's the same thing. They said this kind of Eastern philosophy is that so I'm not playing water polo this fall, I said to her. You might not be playing water polo. So what is it about you as a whole athlete that's been neglected because you're hyper-focused on this specific part of yourself? And I told her, I said, I want you to be an athlete for your whole life, not just for the next few years for water polo, maybe on the national team, so maybe you learn to run. Maybe you learn to become a runner, just learn, or lifting weights. I said, you really need to, as a water polo player, be quite physically strong. Like you need to become a weightlifter. And so I said, I tell athletes that, like, you're taking time away from that organized side, maybe there's something else about you as an athlete, a holistic, I'm talking athlete for life type person that you've neglected. Maybe something else you can try. I know the one thing that the final frontier for me, and I see you do this all the time, Jarvis, is you do yoga. I'm like, I have to do yoga. I know I have to do yoga, but I'm just like, I have to do it. But do you know what I mean? Like, so young athletes that are out there that you're like, okay, the stress is coming in, or maybe you're missing something. Now's a time to really think about those other things that you're neglecting. Even if it's not just the athlete side of you, maybe it's the artistic side of you, maybe like the writing, maybe there's so much to kind of being I'm talking high performance person, like in your life, that go into it. And that includes journaling. That includes the intellectual side and the emotional and spiritual side of that. And, COVID, this time of being away from all this organized crunch time, is giving us a little bit of room to do that. So that's what I would recommend.
It's like holistic health. It's not just, being in physical shape, good health, but like mentally, spiritually, socially as a whole.
Yeah. Breathing, learning like meditation. I know this is something that I'm learning more and more in the work that I do with motivation, but also, in our communities, the skill of meditation. Breathing, deeply breathing, how to manage that stress. And, I have found myself multiple times the last couple of months just being like, and learning to breathe deeply and let go of things is going to be something that in your athletic career will be extremely, extremely important. These are all little tools, puzzle pieces of an entire athlete.
Yes.
Well, that's something that you need, that maybe this is the time to look at that and talk to your parents or talk to someone, your coach maybe, and to maybe get those other kind of goals that you can attain at this time.
Yes, great. We have so many great questions here, but I guess this is another question I think our viewers want to hear. Personally, I'm always curious about this one with athletes such as yourself. You have competed in swimming and rifle shooting as an individual and in water polo on a team. Do you have a preference for individual or team sports, and do you feel how the pressure is different for both?
Yeah. Well, when I was young, I swam competitive from the age 6 to 13.
Okay.
And pretty hardcore from, I'd say, about 9 to 13. Like I'm talking 10 times a week, like really hardcore. I hit, and you're asking me this question because it depends on my age. Because when I hit about 13, 14, I wanted a social life. I wanted friends. And that's what water polo was for me. It was like a group of people. It was fun. It was social, and it was sport. Right. So, at the Indigenous Games, unfortunately, there's no water polo yet. But the first Indigenous games that I competed in 1990 in Edmonton, I swam competitive, and then we were allowed to do a second sport. And so Alwyn Morris, who was our chef de mission,
Yeah, he spoke at our school actually.
Yeah,
He came to our school.
He was our chef, and he said, "Okay, Waneek, you're done swimming. We're going to stick you in rifle shooting." You know, I never shot a gun in my life before that.
Did not know that. Okay.
I hadn't shot a gun. Like, okay, raised mostly in the city. I'm not like you, Mi'kmaq, like get to go hunting all the time. Okay. And I got up there, and I actually won a gold.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, I was like, well, anyway. So at the time when I discovered water polo, I really, really liked it. And then I kind of, after, when you play at a high level in team sports, and all you ladies out there will know what I'm talking about. When you play on a team of women, it can be quite catty sometimes, quite stressful. We're very emotional. We hold grudges like nobody's business, and never let it go. Like in a guy's team, they'll like beat the crap out of each other in a practice, and they'll go have a beer after, and they'll forget about it. Girls will like, someone will look at someone funny, and we will still remember that like 3 weeks later, but it will have grown into this monster problem. And I'm telling you, like, I loved playing with my teammates, but man, some of that got really, really stressful, right? And so after I was done my Olympics, I really was loving the individual sports and running, and I did a lot of running. I did a lot of just weightlifting, and then about 3 years ago, I went back to water polo, and it was a different me that went back. I went back as an older player. My kids were playing at the club, and I suddenly loved the team environment, but I had nothing to prove. Like, I really didn't care if we won or lost. I cared more about whether or not these young girls I was playing with, on average, were 17 years old. Mm-hmm. I wanted them to learn life skills and become brave and get all these good skills out of the game. Yeah.
I love that you said that, because I remember in back, like, as you know, I was raised on reserve, Moncton on reserve school, and one of the big popular sports at our place was always floor hockey there, and pretty much junior high and high school was the only sport I played. Not so much as trying to be an athlete. I was not an athlete. I just did it because all my friends were playing. It was always just that fun socialness of it. Yeah. And then being older, in my 30s, I got into running, which is a very individual sport to do. I absolutely love it. I still teach part-time fitness classes at the gym. So to me, that's kind of like my socialness of athleticism as well there. So I really am happy that you answered that question there, because I was always curious about it myself.
You know what? I wanted to tell you though, like, and everybody out there, because you talked about, you weren't an athlete, but you played because it was social. Like, a great story is of an athlete that I got inducted into the Hall of Fame. So I was inducted this year into Canada Sports Hall of Fame with, I think, like, Martin Brodeur and all these amazing athletes, right? Wow. And was Vicky Keith. And Vicky Keith, I don't know if you remember her. You're almost like my age. So in the 80s and the early 90s, she's like world record holder in swimming, open water swimming, like swam all the Great Lakes, swam the English Channel, swam. And she said, one of the first things she says, I was never an athlete. No one ever picked me for anything. I didn't have the body type for any sport. She says, she says, I just decided I was going to go out and swim a lake. And then she swam lakes and lakes, and she became one of these prolific swimmers. So it's like, what you find your passion for, like, and what you just feel good about and feel good in. When you're a teenager and when you're young, I find sometimes that we forget that sports should feel good. It should make you feel good, and it shouldn't be a place where you are super stressed out. And that's why I always tell parents, you got to keep a close eye on your kids. How are they doing? How are they dealing with this stress? We tend to put a lot of pressure at a young age, and especially sports like that, like hockey and things where there's potential to go to the NHL and all these things. And like, you see a talented athlete, and like, it's just, sometimes it has to be, you really have to weather that stress side of sports and make sure that they're still enjoying themselves. They still like going, they still are having fun.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to move on a lot of these things kind of cross over each other, but I still want to keep them separate. So the next one is a big one, is mental health. And given your incredible experience in sports, my straight up blunt question to you is, do you think we need to approach mental health, the way we approach mental health in sports, do you think it needs to change? And if so, what changes can coaches make to create a more accepted environment?
I think, okay, I'm gonna even step back even more from that question. I think the way we approach mental health has to change. You know, our life is stressful. There's no way that you can go through life without going through some form of stress. It is. And, you know, we're now living in an environment of increased connectivity, social media. The stress is changing and becoming multi-layered. And I think one of the most important things, and this is why I'm so passionate about sports. No, please, okay, sorry, my son. Is that sport is really, and physical activity is the coping mechanism. We need to help our young people develop coping mechanisms, whether it's sports or some sort of culture, all these outlets in order to help them have a way to express the feeling. And, you know, coaches, I think that when they look at Indigenous athletes, and I'm talking about, like, you know, all across, you know, not just all Native teams, I'm talking about all teams. I'm like, we have to change the way we look at teams and sports environments. I mean, there's a lot of academic papers that are written, and I'm doing my master's degree right now in exactly this, my friend. I'm doing my master's at UBC in Indigenous Studies and Kinesiology, and I'm looking at Indigenous mental wellness and Indigenous motivation. So what I'm actually looking at is what you're talking about, is how do we embrace diversity and make it a source of power within team sports. And coaches, you know, ultimately what they understand is that you need a team. You know, say you're in a hockey team, you need a center, you need a defense, you need an offense, you need a goalie. All these people have different jobs. They play different things. You know, everybody, it's the same when you have the emotional kind of strength of a team, the mental strength of a team. Everybody cannot be a center. You know, you have to have diverse mental health. You need mental strengths. You have to have diverse identities and diversity amongst your teammates, because if you have everybody, and if you force everybody to conform to what you think one person's style of strength is, then if that one person has a bad game, it's like a domino effect. Then you will have all the other athletes kind of fall behind. You know what I mean? But if you have a team that has embraced diversity, and, you know, you have, in my case as an Olympic athlete, we had 13 women, and we were different. We even language wise, you know, we had French, you had English, you had Native, you had different ways of being spiritual, you had different ways of love, you had different ways of strength. All these places that you pull strength from as a person were different in all of us. And so if one player had a bad game, you had 12 others that were going to stand up and lead, because we could draw from a different place. And so I think that coaches need to understand that they need to make space and try to understand the power of that diversity and understand how to incorporate it. And the way you can do that is, I think you need to have a strong sense of, where are you going as a team? Where are you going? Like, what is your goal? And what's your game plan? And I'm not just talking a game plan in each individual game, but I'm talking about a game plan overall. And what is the goal of sports? And what are we trying to achieve through this team? Why do you coach? And I bet you talk to so many coaches, and you know what? They want to have strong, healthy, well athletes. That's what they just want. They want success, right? So I think by having the athletes understand this kind of team plan, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to celebrate our diversity, and this is how we're going to talk about our diversity, this is how we're going to talk about what we think and what we feel and what inspires us. I think that needs to be verbalized, and it needs to become part of the team culture. And I think that is where sport needs to go in general, and in particular for Indigenous athletes. You need to make space for them to be powerful.
Their question is still on mental health. It kind of relates to the first question I asked, but I think it's an important one for all our communities across Turtle Island. Is sport, as you said, as we know, has a positive impact on mental health and on our Indigenous communities. What more do you think needs to be done to increase participation in sports and to increase the longevity of participation of Indigenous youth, starting from obviously a young age?
Well, I mean, this has been something that I've been advocating for forever. Like first of all, sport is expensive. It's not accessible. Yeah. Everybody.
Especially if the gear is more expensive, like hockey, compared to running shoes.
Crazy. Yeah. It crazy expensive. Also, access to facilities.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have. Then also, not everybody has a support system. What is, you know, a mother, father, someone to get them there, right? Like not everybody has that. Like maybe both your parents are working. Maybe you're a single parent and that parent's working at the time of the practice. So like, what I think is that needs to happen, and there needs to be a strategic plan, not just from the national perspective, right, on sport development, but it also has to be within the communities. The community like needs to there needs to be like this. Sport is a community building wellness tool. It is more than just getting people active and fit and combating the health issues. This is how we teach our young people how to live together and be well together, and leadership, and to listen and to problem solve, and all the things that sports gives, right? And so such an important tool of community building needs to have a strategic plan. Right. And, you know, you need to strategically plan this. And, you know, right now it's like sport is it's the first thing that's cut from a budget and the last thing that's added. Right. We aren't making it a priority. And when you think about our communities and the things that are our strength, we love, like the Indigenous games, so much pride, so much excitement, just so everybody looking forward to it. There's been generations of families that have participated now, right? Like, you know, and participate in these games, you know, so we know what it has the power to do. But, you know, when we go back to our communities and we're seeing what we're fighting against, you know, the high rates of suicide and all these types of things, we need to start, you know, telling these kids, okay, we are going to combat this, and we are going to do it in a strategic way. We are going to implement these in our communities, and this is what we have hopes for you, you know, 5 years, you know, next year, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road. And that's what I've been saying to the sport leaders in Canada. You know, we need to invest in it as it is a cornerstone of this country, and how we are going to build it together is through sport. So I think it needs to be intentional. I think it needs to be coordinated. And I think we need to put a lot more of our muscle behind it. But you're seeing leaders that are doing that more often. I mean, you look at Leroy Denny, who, you know, who's an athlete himself and also helped build the wellness center in his community. Like that is so, you know, you have, you know, leaders like Tammy Cook-Searson out in La Ronge in Saskatchewan that finally got the wellness center building in her community, northern Saskatchewan, a place where there's a lot of social issues. She's like, we need a wellness center. But for some reason, it's so hard. So this needs to become a political issue. We need to really support our leaders in pushing for the funding, pushing for the infrastructure, and also, you know, you look at all the amazing people that work in sport. You know, I know so many of them across the country, you know, like I think it's Sarah Lynn Knockwood out there who's worked in, you know, all these people, their mandate is huge. Like, they have to do so many things at once, right? They have, like, you know, they're supposed to do physical activity and they're supposed to do sport development. They're running like crazy. I'm like, really, we need to start really looking at it like you would when we are managing and forecasting and supporting our greatest resource, which is our our people, the physical.
What I like to add to that too is, well, as I mentioned before, I teach fitness class at Good Life part-time, and think of like sports and health, the way I like to even see it, investment in sports is investment in health. Healthy bodies, healthy minds. You have a healthy population. You have healthy communities, healthy nations.
Yeah.
It's medicine, essentially.
It's
Preventative medicine.
It's also, but it also takes, like, I mean, I know in Ganawage where, you know, oh God, almost 30 something years ago, there was the Ganawage Schools Diabetes Prevention Project. And this was academics and community that developed this project to change the eating habits, to change the exercise habits of people in Ganawage to combat diabetes. They worked with McGill, they worked with the universities. And I'll tell you, that project helped change the course of my community. When you come to Ganawage, and there is a ton of people doing the fitness crazy. They're crazy, and the food and all this kind of stuff, and that's even moved into like food sovereignty and gardens and all this stuff that's happening. So it is possible, but it's not going to happen overnight, right? And like, we have to fight for consistent funding, but also a good infrastructure of, you know, to support the Sarah Knotwoods and the, you know, the Carrie Calders and all those people out there that are fighting, you know, and working hard. There's got to be 5, 6 of them, right? Like there needs to be, so many people love sport in our communities. And, you know, coaching, I've always said coaching isn't a volunteer thing. It's a profession. In the United States, it's treated like a profession. In Canada, we treat it like a part-time thing. Well, then, if it's part-time and not well-funded, like people then they can't do it as well as they'd like to. But, you know, you go to the United States and a high school football coach is making, you know, what, you know, a person here is making, like, you know, having a very good job because it is seen as a profession, right? So our coach, it comes to coaching, it comes to the infrastructure, and it comes to the service, like the actual access to facilities. And then there's a country that really surprised me. When I went to Australia for the Olympics, there were 18 Indigenous athletes on the Australian Olympic team. 5 of them won medals. Very famous Kathy Freeman won the most watched race, one of the most watched races in Olympic history. She's an Aboriginal woman from Australia, won the 400 meters in track. And I finally got to talk to the Australian Sport Commission. I asked them, I said, so how did you do this? There's like 18 of these athletes. They said, well, in 1976, so you look at how far back, 2000 to 24 years. They, the country went home with only 6 medals from the 76 Olympics in Montreal. Mm-hmm. The country was in an uproar. Oh my goodness. And they had a big referendum. The people of Australia said, we want to become a sporting country. I think they added hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars to their sporting budget. And they started to strategically plan. They started with 5 sports that the country was really good at. And then they grew it and grew it and grew it. Well, they also grew it within the Aboriginal population. So they picked the 5 top sports that Aboriginal people played: rugby, track, boxing, field hockey, and I think ballroom dancing is a really big sport over there. And I think that was in their residential school system over there. And so they developed those, and they started developing centers of excellence in those communities. And it was tied to the greater sport system in Australia. And by the time they hosted the Olympics in 2000, they had 18 Indigenous athletes. And then by 2008, I remember interviewing when I worked for CBC, almost the entire Australian boxing team was Indigenous.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? But see how an investment for very long term, right?
Long-term benefits.
Exactly.
Going into our more or less broader kind of final topic here. Wow, so many great questions. So I think I'm just going to start with this one here. Yeah, it kind of goes in the idea of you know, what we all deal with, racism sometimes. You've been extremely successful in your athletic career, and you have spoken out about being discriminated against. and what it feels like to be the only Indigenous athlete in your team and or environment at times. What advice do you give to Indigenous athletes who often feel isolated on their team, sometimes being the only Indigenous person or one of few Indigenous people on an otherwise team that has next to no Indigenous people at all?
Well, this is the one thing that, thank goodness I was born, I mean, with the gift of the gab. I come from a very loud Lake family. And my mom, that's one thing, is I had to become my own advocate. I really did. I had to speak up for myself. But I also had someone there with me, my mom, my family. I remember this one experience where I think I was on the junior national team, and the coach just kept saying to me, I was a starter, kept saying, threatening me, if you don't do this, you don't do that, there's someone that's going to take your spot. Like this, because I mean, in team sports, there's a depth chart, right? You have your starter, and then you have like people that are, in that, for that position, deep or whatever, 20 deep, whatever sport you are in. So she kept threatening with like the person that was right behind me. And I was just so like tired of it. I went home with my mom. I'm like, I just feel like, how am I supposed to flourish? Someone's always threatening me, right? So the next day, my mom, my grandmother, my sister, my nieces, everybody, they showed up at the pool, and they had lawn chairs, and they put them right on the edge of the pool, and they all sat there, all of them, and they didn't say a word. And the whole practice, they just sat there and they stared at the coach. And it was for that. And my mom said, I was so worried. Oh, you're going to get me kicked off. It's just, no, we're not going to say anything. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to make her understand you are not alone. That this is your family and we are here for you. And you know what? That is what a young Indigenous athlete needs. They need an advocate, someone who just will be there for them and help them. And in our communities, we do need to support our young athletes. We need to be there for them. And this is why I'm so, I wish I heard these stories of athletes being mistreated. I wish I could be at all those places, talking to all those coaches, talking to everybody. But you know what? There's someone, a parent, a grandparent, a cousin, a sister, a brother, someone who can be there and help this young person learn how to articulate how they're feeling, talk to the coaches, create that relationship. And when they do go through a hard time, help them express it to the team environment, right? It's about communication, but it's also about them knowing they're not alone. And having my family there was incredibly strong, knowing I had my family there with me. And so it means something when you show up. It really, really means something. You don't have to say anything. You just show up, you sit in the stands, you have your Tim Hortons coffee, and you make sure you're there. And whomever it is, just make sure you're there to support that young athlete.
Absolutely. And time is going by so fast because I'm really, really loving this conversation with you. But obviously I don't want to take up too much more time, but I do want to ask just kind of one, it's a kind of final question. It's definitely a massive moving forward one. Is for NAIG at home, of course, we are broadcasting to NAIG athletes across Rhode Island. We're doing this chat, but at the same time, it's being live streamed on the YouTube as well. So kind of like it's almost like a final thoughts from you here is what advice do you have for these athletes going forward into NAIG 2021 and for the future?
What kind of advice? Well, you guys get one more year to hone your skills, right? One more year. And like we talked about earlier, what is it that you have neglected because you were in the last phase of your prep? So something needs, something in your game, in your race or whatever can use tweaking. You got another year to tweak it. You got to really look at yourself like that. What am I, what I need to work on this year? Maybe it's your eating habits. Maybe it's your sleeping habits, Are you up gaming all night when you got to practice the next day? Like, I don't know. I hear that's a rumor. That's a thing.
Guilty.
But, you know nothing about that, right?
well, yeah.
So these are things like, you know, advice is that you get another year to plan, another year to train. It is, and that's what even the Olympic athletes that I know, the women's water polo team had qualified and they were getting ready to go this summer. And they said, you know what? It's given us a year. We have things we need to fix. So every athlete can do something better. You know, and moving forward, you know, like beyond NAIG and beyond, a lot of these athletes might be aging out, you know, won't be able to eat. Bigger world out there, you know, what's the next mountain you're going to climb? What is it that the next thing you want to do as an athlete? Remember, being an athlete is a lifelong thing. You are role models. When you go to these games and you come home, you like our ancestors did when they would go on those war parties or trading parties or whatever, they would come home and they tell the stories. You know, I tell these young athletes, you are writing your legacy. You are writing that legacy, and you come home and stories will be told about you, about how you played, how you fought, how you represented the community, how proud you were. These are all part of your story, your legacy, your, you know, what will be told not just to the next generation of NAIG athletes, but this will be told to your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. And so I always tell them that you have the chance to write that story, write it. And what's the next thing? And you know, I think about the things I've learned in sport that have taken me and catapulted me in other directions in my life, you know, whether it's politics, motivational speaking, you know, sales for Manitoba Mucklucks, you know, all these things that have, you know, sport has given me that work ethic, that attention to detail, all the things that have made me a successful person. And I hope one day, you know, a lot of people still talk about my Olympic career. I'm super proud of it, but I don't want it to be the only thing I achieved. At 24, I achieved my greatest thing. I'm like, I know something coming up for me. I have mountains I still want to climb. It's coming. And, you know, and that's how I look at things. And I know that whatever I put my mind to, you know, that goal, I have the skills from being an athlete, from competing, but also from that inspiration of, I went, you know, I competed in 5 games and I coached. And every single time I went back, you know, I competed in, you know, Cowichan, I competed in Minneapolis, I competed in Victoria, and all these places that I went. Every single time I competed on the blocks, I'd look down and I really sucked in the feeling and the environment, the inspiration to be able to look down on the blocks and I'm looking at my own people. This is the only chance I got to compete with and against my own people. And I took that energy that I got from all of my people, and it gave me the confidence. It gave me the confidence to go out into the bigger world and to go after and to achieve and to keep going. So, you know, I'm telling you, athletes, beyond NAIG is the fuel to catapult you into the future. And remember that. A lot of our great leaders now, whether it's Kluwani Ademic, who's the regional chief of the Yukon, NAIG participant, right? There's a lot that are coming up that are you know, participated. So, you know, I think that it's a stepping stone to your absolute greatness. And I mean, as you know, the stories told in our communities over generations, those stories get bigger and bigger. So your story is just getting started.
Waneek, it's just been an honor and a privilege to moderate this all with you. On a personal level, great seeing you and talking to you again.
Yes.
And thank you, sa Walalindo from this Mi'kmaq here in the Mi'kmaq territory, for sharing your experience and sharing your wisdom with all our viewers and athletes. And again, and thank you, Julie, for asking me to do this as well. It's just been an honor, and that's all I can say. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And you know what? It's, you know, NAIG is a super important part. It was an important part of my development as an athlete. It was an important part of my resiliency that was built into me every time I went to the games. It was a refueling. And, you know, over many, many games, you know, I'm very honored to have been a representative of those games at the highest level of sport at the Olympics. You know, I always tell people it was some of the best times of my life was to get a chance to go to those games, and, you know, to be part of this NAIG at home. You know, my hat's off to everybody. You know, I hear you have a great Mohawk woman out there working there. Is it Serene Porter? I got to be on a panel with her. Just incredible people working from all over Turtle Island, you know, as I'm seeing, to make these games still a success, even though they're postponed. So I look forward. Hopefully I'll get to see you in person. And you know what? Every morning, okay, I'm going to tell everybody something. So I had the spring spirit thing, right, where I would get up early to try to post the workout of the day and an inspiration and a playlist. And by the time I even got my stuff up, Jarvis had already run a half marathon, or he'd already run something or done something. And I'm just like, geez, man, this guy, I have to get up at like 5 a.m. to post before you. So you know what? If I know you're involved somehow, I know you are an inspiration. You are always full of happiness and light, and keep it up, because you are an inspiration to me, my friend. And I can't wait to see you next year.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. I've got to go handle my kids.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
Multus.
To anyone watching, like, please be involved in NAIG at home. Check some squares off of your bingo cards, and follow us on Facebook, and check out our virtual marketplace in Mariomi as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Good night.